Good morning, everyone. Just one last reflection on magnanimity for this class. Today I'm going to be reflecting on magnanimity through Havard's framework, but also through an article called The Virtues of the Exemplary Moral Leader by Tholen. It's a 2023 article. So we're just going to kind of look at what they see in terms of magnanimity. Then we're going to look at how that plays out in a business leader, in a religious leader, and how I hope it would play out in my career. So first of all, Tholen and Havard have a lot of agreement on what magnanimity in leadership looks like. They both agree that, it requires courage, it requires vision, it requires moral balance. It requires that the leader be this moral exemplar. The only difference is that Tholen sees a tension between humility and magnanimity, and Havard really does not see that tension at all. Havard is looking at the classical definition of humility through Aquinas and others, talking about seeing yourself as you really are, whether that be great or not so great or anything in between. And so Havard would say there's really no conflict with humility and magnanimity, whereas Tholen would kind of look at humility more in the like modern cultural idea of what humility is, which is kind of like being meek and small. And he would say, well, we can have tension between humility and magnanimity. Ultimately, I think both of them have basically the same idea about what magnanimity in leadership is and looks like. And what it looks like is this guy, Herb Kelleher, who, of course, was the famous CEO of Southwest Airlines. And what really hit me about Herb Kelleher is that he had this vision for something that didn't already exist, that he knew he could bring about and that would transform his industry, which is basically that lots of people like to travel, that travel isn't just for the wealthy, and if he could make it affordable, that more people would travel and that he could have a successful business, which he did. And Herb Kelleher isn't widely considered like a humble guy per se, but if you look at the things that he did, and if you look at the ideals that he had, I would describe him as humble because he didn't view himself as better or higher than other people. So he was famous for taking all feedback from his employees, first of all, that anybody's ideas were important, and also just his concept that air travel was not just for the wealthy, that other people should have access to air travel, I think is a humble idea. So then, in terms of religious leader, I chose John Paul II, who is an extremely magnanimous leader. I mean, his career was so broad that it's really hard to just pick out one thing. But I do want to draw out his leadership of the church through the end of the communist era and through the Cold War, which I think was really visionary, that he had a vision for the ways in which the Catholic Church could help the world transition and help communist countries transition to democracy, which I think was extremely magnanimous. And then also John Paul II recognized the need for the new evangelization. He recognized that the church was coming into the second great apostolic era, which he was far ahead of his time in that. And so he then initiated events in the Catholic Church like World Youth Day. He engaged in world travel more than any other pope, all these things because he had a vision for the future of the church and what the church should do moving into the next century. And extremely magnanimous guy. So just looking at a side by side, it's these words are pulled out of the various writings that I looked at on these two men, but really I think clearly they're both charismatic, they're both innovative, both visionary, and both servant focused. Of course, they were both very courageous men that were servants. I think, many popes, but John Paul II liked to say that he's a servant of the servants of God. And that's how he lived his life. They both were transformative in their, industries. John Paul II certainly brought the Catholic Church into the modern era, and especially engaging in media as a way to transmit the Catholic Church's message. And they both left incredible legacies. Poor Southwest Airlines is not doing as well now that Herb Kelleher doesn't have as much influence as he used to. And I think the legacy of John Paul II in the Catholic Church has to do with the activation of the youth and the new evangelization. So, in conclusion, both of these two leaders exhibit magnanimity, I think, primarily because they recognized and they had a vision for the future that was different and better than it had been in the past. For me, that's the unifying factor between Kelleher and John Paul II. And they were both able to bring about their vision because of their humility and their life of service, and because of their courage to believe that that vision was possible. So for me, in terms of my self-reflection, I look at the vision or the mission statement that we wrote at the very beginning of this class. This is what I wrote. And so I'm just pulling out, okay, what are the virtues that are associated with that? So I wrote that I want to be who God created me to be, which is about humility to me. To encourage, support, and appreciate the unique giftings of each person on my team, which for me is about being a servant leader, so that together we can bring about the kingdom of God on earth. That's the goal, and it's a big goal, and it's a broad goal. And why? So that we can set the world on fire. And that's the legacy I would like my leadership to leave, is that in some way the church is better, more active, more inflamed and on fire because of the work that my team and I have accomplished. So thank you very much, everybody. And it's been a real pleasure being in this class with you guys.